Today on Making Horror, I'm reviewing The Nun. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Making Horror. I'm your host Ryan Sheets, and I'm going to get this out of the way right off the bat. I am a huge fan of the Conjuring franchise. It's actually my favorite horror franchise of all time. But that doesn't mean that I'm biased. I'm completely able to acknowledge some of the more lackluster entries in the franchise. And The Nun kind of walks the thin line between being lackluster and a pretty well-made movie. So what doesn't work here? Well, first off, the script is incredibly weak, which is very surprising because it's written by someone who has a hand in writing most of the Conjuring films. That's not to say that it's poorly acted, quite the contrary, but things like Valak's backstory are somewhat out of a cartoon, and I couldn't help but giggle while watching it. And speaking of Valak, for a movie called The Nun, there was not a lot of the nun. For the most part, she appears in brief glimpses and reflections until the last 10 minutes of the movie, which is really kind of a bummer, especially when the opening was such a good scene. It really pumps you up for the rest of the movie, but you didn't really get that payoff until the very end. But by far my biggest complaint with the film is that it just never stops to take a breath. It's just scary scene after scary scene, leaving no time to build the tension whatsoever. Most of the scares in this film are jump scares, which is pretty unfortunate for a movie in the Conjuring universe. It doesn't seem like any of the scares in this film are earned. The one scene in the film I felt was truly frightening involved multiple nuns with bags over their heads. The tension was built, and in the end, it led to nothing, which is kind of a theme here. Now, there were a couple things that I did like about this film. Firstly, the sets were incredible. This movie is a love letter to old school gothic horror, like the old school Universal monster movies. It was really refreshing to see that in theaters again, and it was just the kind of imagery I wanted to kick off the spooky season. In addition to that, the score was excellent, though sometimes misplaced. The song that kicks off the soundtrack, called God Ends Here, in the film, the scene that it's actually played in just completely doesn't match the tone. It's very bizarre. It definitely feels like a song that would open the film rather than a song that plays at the beginning of the third act. But the music that plays every time Valak makes an appearance is just excellent. And if I ever heard that music while walking down a creepy alleyway or something, because I tend to do that, I would probably cry like a little baby. Like I said earlier, the acting here is pretty good, with Taissa Farmiga being the standout. There's a scene where a bunch of nuns are all praying together that gets pretty intense, and I think it was Taissa Farmiga's acting that sold the scene. In the end, The Nun wasn't quite the movie that I wanted it to be, but I would be lying if I said that I didn't enjoy it. And it's definitely the kind of movie that I wanted to kick off the Halloween season. It's not quite as strong as the other entries in the Conjuring franchise, beating out only the first Annabelle. Now, this being a review, obviously I have to give this some kind of rating, but I'm not gonna do stars or letter grades or anything like that. Instead, since this is a horror show, I'm going to do slashes, and this gets 3 slashes out of 5. It's a fun ride with some pretty glaring flaws, but it's definitely worth the watch. So go check it out, and until next time, try not to get scared.